Welcome to Ordinary People Doing Extraordinary Things, the podcast show. I'm your host, Carrie Roberts, and today I have another fabulous guest. I have Martin Sawa. Welcome, Martin. Thank you for being here today.
Hi, Carrie, and thanks so much for having me.
Yeah, so I want to start from the beginning with you. So you grew up with Ukrainian immigrant parents, and I'm curious as a kid, what did you notice about them and how they thought about work and money and life? What did you notice as a young kid with them?
The immigrant experience is kind of relative to the circumstances that one leaves behind. They immigrated after World War II, and they had lived under the regimes of Hitler and Stalin. So it doesn't get any worse than that. And when they came over, their mindset was that the worst of things that could happen to them here would be infinitely better than the best of what they left behind. So they struggled at first. They were sponsored and kind of did labor for free, but then they raised themselves up. My dad built our first house with his own hands with the help of neighbors. And they always strive to have the children do better than the parents, which I think is sort of paradigmatic for most immigrants. So they wanted me to get the best possible education and then do the best I could in the world.
Now, how, you said that they, survived all the stuff that was happening during World War II. How were they able to come over here? Was it something that was easy to do at the time? Did something happen? Like, how were they able to come here? Or they just were like, I'm going to leave. I need to do anything to get away.
Well, the circumstances, again, weren't such as people might try to compare with the present day.
Yeah.
The world was at war, and they lived in a city in Ukraine, central Ukraine. And this was just one of the epicenters of battles and mass killings in the whole theater. So when the Red Army repelled the Germans after the Germans' invasion, they fled ahead of the Red Army because life under Stalin would be just as bad as Hitler. And for a couple of years wandered around Eastern Europe, living day to day and trying to dodge death. When the armistice was declared and the war was officially over, you couldn't just immigrate to wherever you wanted to. Everybody, of course, wanted to come to America. And so they lived in a DP camp, displaced persons camp, for 4 years before they were allowed to legally immigrate. And they jumped at the opportunity. I was actually conceived in the camp, but birthed on U.S. soil. So
Interesting. That's very interesting. So they come here, like you said, it was better than being there. They want their kids to do well. Was there a point, again, as a kid, maybe a teenager or so, where you say to yourself, I'm going to make more money. I'm going to do better. Like, was there something really inside of you at a young age that was like, I'm not going to live this type of life. I'm going to do something different?
well, I definitely wanted to get out of the small town. I love my parents, but in today's age where adult children live with their parents and actually like it, I just have a hard time relating to that. I wanted to get out on my own. And so I literally left town the day of my high school graduation. I bought my ticket months before and headed for Chicago. The luckiest thing was that there was a Jesuit boarding school located on the perimeter of town, and they admitted just a handful of town students who could pass the exams and so forth. And I had to work my way at the school to pay for tuition, but I learned more in high school how to think, how to read than I ever did in college. So that gave me a preparation that was invaluable.
And did you find, in your book that we're going to be talking about, you kind of say like at age 30, you're done with this kind of 9 to 5 thing. You want to make more money. Where were you working up until that point? And what was it about kind of that 9 to 5 lifestyle that just wasn't fitting your needs and wants in life at that time? Was it because you were turning 30? Because I do think decades kind of make people rethink, or what was it about that time and what was happening?
I moved to California after college, and I I had a degree in sociology, which was kind of worthless, but I had an interest in city planning. So I packed everything I owned, moved out here, lived in Oakland, California, and eventually met my first wife, and was a city planner, and I was dead broke, and I hated my job. I was commuting 40 miles one way. Even at that time, it was a rough commute.
Yeah.
And I hated what I did. And it wasn't anything particular with 30 other than I knew the clock was running and things just get harder the later you are in life. So there was an incident where I was at the zoning counter for the city of San Jose, and a developer came in looking very prosperous, with gold medallion, and it looked like a silver fox, and he was yelling at me to process his project. And right then I told a colleague, I said, "Can you take over?" And I drove home, and on that drive I said, I'm going to quit, and I'm never going back to a real job again. My wife didn't take it too well, but
Well, I think that's a problem I think everyone has faced at some time in their adult life. I know I certainly have in the past, where if you're at a place, especially if you don't like what you're doing, the people are nasty, it's stressful, it's a long commute. I mean, all of those things add up to just unhappiness and feeling unfulfilled. So you decide at that point, okay, I've had enough. This isn't what I want to be doing. This isn't where I want to be. But what is the next step? Where do you decide to go, and where were the challenges at that time?
well, fortunately, 10 years earlier, the summer when I first moved to Chicago, I was 18 years old, and I needed a job to pay for school. And I became a door-to-door salesman and selling Fuller brush products. I don't know if your listeners even know what that is, but that was one of the dominant door-to-door sales companies of the time. And I had a great mentor, and everything I learned about sales, and I'm not being facetious, I learned that summer. So when I decided to quit, I said, I know I can sell. And I didn't have a particular passion for real estate, but I just thought, what was the biggest value assets I could think of? Well, they were commercial real estate, and then that must pay the biggest commission. And so that's what I'm going to do.
Can I tell you, I would say, and on this show and also outside of the show, probably 5 or 6 people have told me that same kind of story. None of them got into it because they really loved real estate or they were necessarily excited about architecture or housing, but it was, okay, I see the potential for the financial opportunities. I like the process. That's why I did it. That's why I continued. So it's fascinating to me that you say that's something that's been said quite often. When you decide, okay, this is what I'm going to do, it's commission based only. It doesn't necessarily happen overnight. How did you get into it, and what was that first year like for you? Was it as easy or as hard as you expected it to be?
Well, it was many times harder than I expected, although I had never done it, so I didn't really know what to expect. It was at the point when the financial markets interest rates were like 18%. It was crazy. It was the worst possible time to enter, and I didn't know what I was doing. And there's many occupations within commercial real estate. You can be a leasing broker, property management, et cetera. I chose investment property sales, which meant that the deals took the longest, months, if they closed at all, and had the greatest risk. So I mean, and it was, I got thrown in the deep end, or I threw myself in the deep end, but I vowed I would never go back. So I didn't make a dime for almost a year. And needless to say, I got a family, now a baby,
Yeah.
two stepchildren to support. So I started kiting credit cards. I just drew them down, pay household expenses, then got another one. At one point, I think I probably had 12, 15. And they were kind of all drawn to the max. And then fortunately, I started getting the checks in, and the rest is history, as they say.
Well, I think that's an important piece, though, because I think, what's fascinating to me, and we talk a lot about on this show, is that kind of tough journey, because so many people say, okay, I'm done with this, or I'm ready for this next step. And they think like it's not going to be that hard, but it's always way harder every single time. Was there a point during that first year where you said to yourself, I'm done, I guess I need to go back to 9 to 5? Or was it like, no, I'm going to keep going. I got this. I will figure it out.
I I don't recall that I ever was going to go back.
Hmm.
It was just, well, if the credit cards run out, what am I going to do next
Yeah.
to solve that problem? But it was always, because as I got into it, I had this, that sales experience. So I knew sort of the discipline of sales, and I liked what I did, and I liked the people that I was dealing with, as opposed to residential. Commercial sales, you're generally dealing with a more sophisticated client, and it's more analytical, less emotional. So all of that appealed to me. So I knew I was in the right place, and no, I wasn't going to go back.
Well, again, I think that's an interesting point as well. What you're saying here is it was hard, but I liked it. I liked the people. I was excited about it. And so that seemed to kind of trump everything, even though the process was challenging and that first year was tough, correct?
Yeah, and again, for me, holding down a real job, doing something I hated, and having to be told what to do every day by people I didn't respect. They were fine people. I wasn't cut out for that. So that's the motivation. A central theme of the book is putting skin in the game,
Yeah.
and that tests to see what you're really going to do, not just in business but in life. If you have no skin in the game, if you're not willing to take any downside risk, then you're never going to achieve the proportionate reward.
Yeah, no, I agree. And like I said, it's nice to hear the clarity that you had on it, even though it was challenging. So after that first year, you start to kind of make some money, you start to kind of get some headway. Would you say those next few years that it started to come fairly easy for you to kind of bring in that financial success for yourself?
It was always hard because when you're on commission sales as a broker,
Mm-hmm.
every year, January 1st, it starts out at zero. You reset the counter. And so there's always that, gee, am I going to, how well am I going to do this year? You never know. I mean, you sort of hope, but you never really know. But yeah, every year I sort of progressed. I left the little company I was with in Oakland and joined a major national company in San Francisco. And then as the decade progressed, moved up to another company and eventually worked for what today are household names, CBRE, which was then CB Commercial, Coldwell Banker, and Cushman and Wakefield. So in about 10 years, I was kind of selling what I call mega deals, high-rise office buildings, shopping malls, industrial parks. I was really good at what I did.
So, as your book kind of talks about, and I think it's similar to life, sometimes we kind of reach that point of what we want. And especially on a financial side, people always think, oh, everything must be great. This person's life is perfect. But sometimes it can have a downside. There can be kind of these dark spots or areas that people can get themselves into trouble. Can you talk about anything that you experienced that was like that and why you kind of feel like it happened to you at that time?
Well, scroll ahead. My first wife and I divorced, and then, but we had joint custody of our daughter, and she stayed with me on weekends every week, and we did homework on the phone every night, and we're very close and still are. And then there was 5 years when I just dated and was more into my work, and then I met my second wife, and she was her background was similar to mine. She was from the rural South, and after high school, just got on a bus, came to California, and did what she had to do. And we clicked, and then got married and moved to LA. And now I was sort of at the top of my game as a broker. And but as the title of my book, The Other Side of Success suggests, success comes at a cost. I was drinking heavily, just kind of as an aside. The little town where I grew up in Wisconsin had a population of about 5,000 people and 40 bars. And that's a staggering ratio that maybe will only be equaled in Russia someplace. So everybody in town was an alcoholic. I mean, all the men, and they'd go to the bar after work and then go home and fight with their wives. And that was just, I thought that's the way things were. So, but as I was now traveling internationally and, stress and, client functions and rewards dinners and all of that. And there was, I just personally was spiraling downward. And there came a moment of truth. And my wife, she was not only wife and lover, but she was my spiritual mentor and moral compass, said, this is it, and you've got to change. And I did, and I did what I had to do.
You said that success comes at a cost. Do you think that that is true for everyone?
Yes, so much depends how you define it in the first place. But frankly speaking, everyone pays a price in the balance sheet of life. And the people who you imagine, the very wealthy or materially successful or celebrity or whatever, that they don't have any problems. It's just that their publicity is well handled, and you don't know about it. So yeah, but people deal with it differently. And one of the reasons I decided to write the book, which is a memoir, and I was kind of didn't want to do it because I always thought that'd be a bit narcissistic, it was not just to make it a business bio, because that's been done well, but you also have a one-dimensional protagonist, right? The hero, sure, they overcome obstacles and some deals fall apart, but generally speaking, they come out on top. And the message is, if you just look at what I did, you too can do that. So I decided that it would be part business bio, but also a pretty raw personal accounting and as truthful as I could be. And that would give it some dimension and show what the other side looks like, at least for me.
Did you had said your wife at the time, she had said, look, something's got to change. And you said, I decided to change. I would imagine that wasn't the first conversation she had with you, because I feel like when someone says something to someone, there can be denial, there can be, oh, you're making a big deal out of it, and it's not till we kind of get to that breaking point where you realize like, oh, it's enough. Were there a lot of conversations going on? And what do you think it was about that conversation? Or maybe what was that moment for you where you said, I need to change. Something isn't working here.
Yeah, I mean, and I don't want to give a spoiler alert, but my drinking got out of hand
Mm-hmm.
for years before that, and then I had a one night stand with a old girlfriend, and my wife. She was like really spiritually in tuned, and she had powers in what I call the world of the unseen. So it wasn't like I was going to hide anything. She would know about it, as soon as I knew about it. But she wasn't the kind to like argue or proselytize. She just let me hang myself basically until I figured out that I had to do it, that it wasn't that I had to figure out it was better for me and my life would be better rather than it's something I feel, she made me do or someone made me do.
I think that's a hard place to get to for people. It's hard sometimes to sit with ourselves and realize something about ourselves isn't good, to admit that. And then to kind of say, okay, I need to change. And then actually making the change is a challenging journey in and of itself. When you kind of had that moment, what would you say was maybe the first thing you did to start making change in your life?
Well, I addressed the alcohol problem. We went to a counselor who was a very, very wise person who knew from experience. And he said any psychological or other issues you can't deal with until you control the addiction because your head's in a fog. So it's useless to do any other kind of therapy. And that resonated with me. That made sense. So my dad, he dealt with it when he had heart surgery. The doctor told him that if he kept drinking, he'd be dead in a couple of years. And he went cold turkey. It's just an amazing act of will. But then he became withdrawn and remorseful and would just sit silent in his chair every night. So it left a hole and he didn't know how to fill it. And so when I talked with this counselor, he said, that works for some, but not for others. You have to figure out what's going to work for you. So you stick to it. And so I went on what I call a program of controlled moderation. I would go days without drinking. And then if I felt the urge to have a beer, I'd have one, possibly two, but never more. And then eventually I saw life could be better without drinking. And for somebody who hasn't done it, it doesn't make any sense, but you literally believe your life is better by drinking, and that's why you drink. And so you adjust the mindset. And I've been on that program ever since.
Well, that's great. And I congratulate you because, again, anytime we can acknowledge our weaknesses and areas that aren't working for us in our life and then make that change, even though it's hard, is a huge accomplishment. And I think it's something, as you mentioned earlier, people don't always know what's going on with people. The truth, they have the PR version of themselves on social media nowadays or before the paper or whatever it is. And it is nice to have these conversations and understand that people are human and the growth that they have. So that brings me to, does your definition of success, has it changed? Is it different from what you defined it as before versus what you define it as now?
Well, I never really thought about it until I started writing the book.
Mm-hmm.
When you're going through it, and the author, E.L. Doctorow, described writing as driving at night in the fog. You can see up to your headlights, and that's about it, but you can still complete the journey. And I think that's true in life. When you're in it, when you're in the moment, you're not self-evaluating. You're not creating the story of what this means. You're trying to close a big deal.
Mm-hmm.
But in retrospect, as I was writing the book, I thought about it, and I think there's a couple of components. I think success, to me, is to set tangible. These are real specific, tangible goals. and which you either achieve and then raise the stakes and set new goals, or you don't achieve, but then you autocorrect and reset and create a new goal. And so it's a successive process of just goal achievement. The problem becomes if the end result is you're totally preoccupied with the material world. Mm-hmm. You can be really rich and wealthy and famous and still be an asshole. So
yes.
So what do you do with that information? Well, I think there has to be an alignment of that definition of success with your core values and what I call the world of the unseen, and which I've had some experience with. That then encompasses religion and spirituality and the metaphysical. And so when I work with people, either like mentorship or, sort of loose coaching, so to speak. Mm-hmm. The first question I ask them is, what do they believe to be true? From the top down, okay? If you believe life starts at zero and ends at zero, then that's your belief, and you need to live true to yourself. And so making as much money as you can at any cost, and winding up when you die with, a high net worth, you've achieved success. But if you don't believe that's what's true, then what is it? And how do you align your beliefs and core values? And how do you monitor that as you're progressing up the ladder? And what decisions and choices do you make that at times may not be the best decision to close this deal or do whatever. And that's the hard part. But I think there's some kind of balancing of the two involved.
Yeah, no, I think that's a really good point. And I love that you're kind of bringing in just this awareness of your own values, taking a step back for a moment, really thinking about what it means to you because it's important. Now, your book, as you mentioned, it kind of is this bit of a memoir, but also lessons, and goes in a lot more detail of things that you've been through, and kind of how people can kind of find the success for themselves in the way that works for them. Can you tell people where they can get the book, the title, and where they can connect with you if they'd like to learn more? Sure.
The easiest thing is just to go to my website, which is www.martinsawa.com, MartinSawa. And there with a click, you can go to Amazon or the bookseller of your choice and buy the book. With another click, you can go to my social media sites. If you scroll down to the bottom, you can send me an email. I really love hearing from my readers. And there's another tab where you can listen to some of my other archived interviews on a number of topics, not only business and entrepreneurship, but even the paranormal and things of that sort. So
I like that. I like that mix. That's pretty interesting. So the last question I ask all of my guests, Martin, is what is one word or quote or mantra that you try to live by every single day?
Well, I try to go to sleep at night without any regrets. And why that's so is explained in the book. But if there's any expression, I would just say, thanks be to God.
I love it. Well, I thank you so much. I'm excited for you in your own personal journey and now being able to share it with others. And I thank you for being here.
Thank you so much.